just like copy and paste 12 asterisks?
Yes, 12 asterisks.
Okay.
That is our super secret stream keys. 12 asterisks.
All right, so hopefully we can actually get it started now. So yeah, this is a description of the problem. Again, you're given some text, and then you output that exact same text. It's a really simple problem. In fact, you can use a really simple Python program, like that's literally 2 lines to do that. Right, where you just read in the input and then you just print out exactly that same thing that they gave you. But we're going to try to see if we can solve this using genetic algorithms. So we move on to part 2. Here's another kind of overview of what genetic algorithms really do, or at least our specific genetic algorithm. Right, so the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to create a population of these things called organisms. You're just going to create like 100 or so of these things called organisms. Now, what's an organism? Well, each organism will have something called a genotype, which is kind of like its DNA, and it'll also have a phenotype. So if you're familiar at all, you took like biology in high school or something, the genotype is like your genes, and the phenotype is the expression of those genes. And we're going to kind of borrow those ideas here. You know, that idea seems abstract right now, but it'll become more concrete when we start looking at the code. But then for each organism in the population, we're going to calculate a fitness using a fitness function. So that's going to be like, how good is this organism? Like, how fit is it? And remember, each organism is kind of like a answer to our problem. We're trying to see how good that answer is. And then something called natural selection will occur. So we're going to establish some kind of mating pool, and in that mating pool, you're going to have the population, members in the population that have the highest fitness, and they're going to be more likely to be selected from that mating pool. And then you're going to randomly select 2 organisms from the mating pool, and they will pass their genes on to a new organism via some kind of crossover function, right? And then that new organism that they create is going to be mutated a little bit and added to the new population. And that's going to just be repeated as many times as possible until you get either an optimal answer or an answer that's good enough. And note that the old population just dies out whenever they've created a new population. And I realize this, again, is all really abstract right now, but it'll become more concrete, hopefully, as we move on. So here's kind of a visualization of what's going on. You have your population, and for each member of the population, this is like its genotype. And then you go down here, and every member of the population is going to be evaluated and have a fitness value associated with them. And then based on that fitness value, you're going to choose some to reproduce. So they're going to cross their genes over and create a new organism, and then you're going to mutate that, and that's going to go back into the population. That's just going to be repeated over and over and over again until you get a good enough answer. Right, so in terms of how let's think now about how what I just described applies to our specific problem of generating some text. So as we talked about earlier, every organism has a genotype and a phenotype. You're always going to have to define that, right? For this specific project, the genotype and phenotype are going to be the same thing. So the genes of the organism in this case are going to be the characters that it produces. So for example here, let's say the characters that this produce, so its genotype is GoPokes. So that's the characters G-O space and then P-O-K-E-S. Right, so that would be its genotype, and then its phenotype in this specific case would actually be the same thing. Now, there are cases where that wouldn't happen. So, for example, you might be modeling some kind of like physics thing where the genotype is the movements that it makes, and the genotype is like the movements that it makes, and the phenotype is actually making those movements. And you kind of have to figure out how to encode that based on your specific problem. So, with this information in mind, we're going to go ahead and create a class called Organism in Python that's just going to kind of make these ideas we just talked about a little more concrete. So let's do that. What you're going to want to do is go ahead and open up whatever text editor you want and create a new file. And you'll get to see some of Ben's JavaScript development, I suppose, that we heard so much about. I'm just going to... I'll just do it this time. Cool. So yeah, if you want to go ahead and create a new file, and I just called mine genetic.py. You can call it pretty much whatever you want. I'd go ahead and call it this, though, because another thing we're going to write is going to use that name. So genetic.py. And for right now, if you want to just copy and paste that code that's in that block, and just paste that into that file. Okay, so what is this doing, right? It's doing exactly what we talked about earlier. So if you're not familiar with Python, that's all right. But you've been using classes probably. If you're in CS1, you've been using classes in Java or something. It's the same thing, right? We create a up here. We're just doing some imports for some libraries that we need, and then we have this organism class. Now this def __ init. This is the constructor. So it's you've been using constructors in Java, I think, and this is the same. This is the same type of thing. It's called the constructor. And in here, what we're going to do, in Python, you always pass in self. That's how it is able to reference itself. You just always will have that in there. And then the rest of the arguments are after that. So gene length is the one argument we're going to pass in. So let's say our target word is like hello, then that has 5 characters. So the gene length would be 5. And we're defining a few things here. The first is called this nucleotides. So if you remember anything from biology, the nucleotides were like A, T, C, and G, which are like on the DNA, all the different nucleotides that each element of the DNA could be. So our nucleotides are just going to be all the letters, so like A through Z, capital and lowercase, and then plus a few punctuation marks that I could think of. And that's just going to be all the different things that the genotype could have in it. And then we're actually going to create that genotype. So it's just going to be an empty list. And then we're going to populate that list with actually just a random member of the nucleotide. So a random letter. So for I at range gene length, that's just going to go from 0 to whatever the length of the genes are. We're just going to select a random letter and put that in the list. And that's going to be the genotype for this specific member of the population, this specific organism. And then, I don't know why I even put this here because we don't end up even using it later, but the phenotype is just a string representation of that genotype. So, any questions about that?
In short, all we've done at the moment is just basically created a random string of the quote nucleotides, the letters in our alphabet that we're allowing at the moment.
Cool. So that's going to define kind of how this organism works. And the next thing we want to think about is the fitness function. So the fitness function, with genetic algorithms, depending on the problem that you're trying to solve, there's a lot of the stuff that you can change, and a lot of it will stay the same. But two things that you're always going to want to find are how your organisms are, like what your genotype is and what the phenotype is. And also, one of the most important things is the fitness function. So you can think of the fitness function as a function that tells you how good an organism is. And therefore, if you know how good that organism is, you know how likely it should be to transfer its genes to the next generation. So if you think like survival of the fittest, that fitness function, like we don't know how fit something is unless we have a way to evaluate its fitness. And that's what the fitness function does. So we need to define that. So the fitness function is right here, and we can just pop that into our class that we made, or you could copy and paste the whole thing. But in case you didn't know, in Python, it uses like indentation instead of brackets. So when you're pasting stuff in, that might be helpful to know. So like everything, like in Java, you'd have a curly brace here and down here, and everything between there would be in there. It would be part of that class. But here you just kind of tab over or put spaces or whatever you want to do. But here's the fitness function. We're just calling it Calc Fitness. So it's going to, of course, you always have to have that self argument when you're inside a class, and it's going to take in this target. So the target is the target word. So the way this fitness function is going to work is we have a current genotype, which we basically have a current sequence of characters, and then we have a target sequence of characters. So if our current sequence of characters was like HELLX, and the target word was HELLO, then the fitness, right, should be like 4 out of 5. And that's just kind of what we're doing here. So does that kind of make sense? So maybe I can write it. 4. So can everyone see this all right? If let's say the target was, hello, and our current sequence is almost there, but here it has like an X instead of an O, right? Well, it has 4 characters right out of 5, so the fitness should be 4 out of 5. Right? I don't know if you can see that very well, but that's kind of what this is really going to do. A lot of the syntax is going to be kind of confusing if you've never seen Python before. That's okay. What's important is understanding what it's actually doing. But it's going to just create a correct count, and then it's going to go through each individual gene and the actual what that gene should be. And if they're equal, then just add 1 to correct count. And then we're going to say that we're going to create a new instance variable called self.fitness, and that's going to be equal to, like, here the correct count would be 4, and the length of the target would be 5, so that'd be like 4 over 5. Okay, any questions about that so far? Cool. And then you're thinking like, okay, well, what's this really weird thing over here, right? Like, this makes sense. So it's like, it'd be like 4 over 5 or 1 over 10 or something like that. But then we're, so this times in Python is like exponents. So this is like raising that to the 100th power. You may be thinking like, that's really weird, why would you do that? And the reason is, this is something I debated putting here or like adding as an optimization later. But if you think about it, like, if I had one that had 3 characters right, so say it was just like HOLLO, that only has 3 characters right. Well, the one that has 4 characters right is actually a lot better than that one, right? So it's kind of a linear function if we didn't have that exponent here, right? But since we want the word with 4 characters right to be much better than the one with 3 characters, we kind of can turn that into an exponential function so that it will recognize that it's much better. Otherwise, you're not incentivizing your genetic algorithm you're not incentivizing it enough to go for the ones that have more characters correct.
Just real quickly interjecting, I think you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but the advantage of this is when you get to like really, really large bodies of text, for instance, where without this exponentiation, like the difference between having 1 character off and having just 2 characters off, like that's a really, really small difference that may never be overcome. But doing this exponentiation actually makes it a much more radical difference that the algorithm can overcome.
Yeah, and you can even...
So, did you try other exponents, or where did you come up with 100?
So, yeah, it's just a trial and error thing. I mean...
Okay.
Basically, the way I generally do it, and I don't know if this is the best way to do it, is just go as big as you can until you start to see, like, performance issues, and that seems to be...
That's pretty much the... Anyway, that's a reasonable way to do it.
Okay. Yeah, and 100 is just the one that ended up working out.
I guess I'm surprised at 100. Because at 100, let's say you have Go Pokes or something, that's going to squash everything down to almost 0.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so because that's... you can actually set that as a parameter too, if you wanted to. With 100, with the size of text we're using, it ended up working out better, and that's why after that, when if I made like 1,000 or something, everything would get squashed down to 0, so you wouldn't. Okay, any questions about this so far? We're just calculating the fitness at this point. Okay, cool. So just to kind of review what we've done so far, we've created this organism, right? And this organism has a genotype and a phenotype, which we talked about. And now we have a way of figuring out how good this organism is, how fit it is. And that's all we've done so far. So, yeah, and I added a quick note here because I had that. So right here, I have this like 4-gene actual in zip. In the notes, I added a bit of a note to kind of, because I know that's like something that if you've never seen Python before or never used that, that's something that probably seems really unfamiliar to you. So feel free to read through that if that's something that's confusing you. Cool. Yeah. So moving on to part 3. So we've created this organism class, and now we talked about we need to have organisms, and they need to be in a population. So the next logical thing to do is create a population class, because that population is going to allow us to perform natural selection on the population. So go ahead and just copy this and paste it. So paste it in the same file, but since this is a different class, you need to go back to the first indentation, like the 0th level indentation, and paste that in. So hopefully this should look a little more familiar now that you've already seen one class built in Python. We're just saying the class name here, and then we're defining the constructor. In this constructor, we're going to actually pass in a few more things than we did before. The first thing is going to be a hyperparameter called population size, or called pop size here. That's just how big the population is. And later on, when we actually get this done, we're going to play around with that population size and see how it affects the performance of our algorithm. But this might be like there's 100 members of the population, 100 organisms in there, or there's 1,000, or there's 300, or that's what that is. Then we're going to define something called a mutation rate. Now, this is going to be something that's kind of important, but we're going to get more to it later. So let's just kind of ignore that for now. And then also the target word is like the word that you're trying to get to. So if it was go pokes, you would put go pokes in there. Okay, cool. And then so we're just creating instance variables based on what they passed in. Okay, and now we're going to initialize the population. I guess this terminology gets kind of confusing because we have the population class, and then we have the population that's within the population class. But that population is just going to be an array of organisms. So when we first create this population, we're just going to go up to population size and then add a new organism to the population. And remember, when we create a new organism, it's going to randomly generate its genes. And yeah, so it's going to randomly generate its genes. So now, let's say our population size was 100. After creating this new population by calling the constructor method, we're going to have an array here of size 100 that contains 100 organisms that all have random characters as their genes. So, yep. And let's see. So now go ahead and just kind of think back to that part 2 that we did earlier, where we kind of defined the genetic algorithm and how it would work. The first thing is we said that we would create a population of organisms, right? And then we said for each organism in the population, their fitness is going to be calculated using a fitness function. And then we said natural selection will occur, and then we go back here to step 2, and we just repeat the process until we get a good enough answer. Right, well, I put a lame meme, woohoo, way to go, because you successfully did step 1, which was initializing the population, and now we need to do step 2. So right now, though, is there any questions up to this point? Okay, so step 2, we said for each organism in the population, their fitness will be calculated using a fitness function. Well, hopefully these words feel a little more concrete now, and you know kind of what they mean. So, yeah, we do have a population of organisms. That's what's in our population class. And each organism has a fitness that you can calculate because we wrote that Calc Fitness function. And now what we need to do is actually do that for each organism in the population. So I wrote this method here called Calc Fitness. Now this is Calc Fitness for the population and not for the organism. So go ahead and take this method here, or function, whatever you want to call it, and put it into the population class. And literally all this is going to do is go through every organism in our current population and call Calc Fitness on that organism using the target word. So if you recall, Calc Fitness function up here for the organism class, it calculates the fitness and then it creates a instance variable called self.fitness and it assigns the fitness to that variable. So we're just basically creating that instance variable for every organism in the population in this method. That way, for every organism in there, we can say, organism.fitness, and it will actually give us a value. So, yep, and then in the constructor, we should probably go ahead and call that method. That way everything has a fitness associated with it as soon as we create the population. So go ahead and go back inside that constructor. I just copied and pasted just that one piece of code. I also have the entire constructor here written if you just want to replace all of it. But back inside the constructor, you just put self.calcFitness. And that's going to call this method. That way every random organism will have a fitness associated with it. Okay, cool. And yep, so that actually takes care of steps 1 and 2 of the algorithm. So now we need to do the really fun part, which is natural selection. Right, so go ahead and move on to that. Okay, so now we have a population of organisms, and they all have a fitness associated with them. That's going to allow us to perform natural selection now. So in order to, so the reason we're doing natural selection is so the population can pass on its very best genes onto the next generation. And then, of course, this isn't exactly like biological evolution. It's only inspired by it because after all those members of the population pass down their genes, they all just die. And I mean, you don't just have kids and die in the real world, but yeah, I suppose so.
You recently had a child, didn't you?
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. So you would know.
Yes.
Feeling okay?
Yeah, it's excellent.
Okay. So recall how we define natural selection. We said a mating pool would be established, and in that mating pool, the organisms of the population with the highest fitness would be more likely to be selected from the mating pool. And we say we would randomly select 2 organisms from the mating pool, although it's not completely random because it's going to be biased towards the one with higher fitness. And then those 2 organisms will pass their genes on to a new organism via some kind of crossover function. Then that new organism is going to be mutated a little bit and added to the new population. And then that's repeated until the new population is full. And then again, note that the old population just dies out. Okay, so let's work a little backwards and just kind of work on this second paragraph right here. So specifically, we need to define a way for, when you do select 2 organisms, we need to find a way to make them generate offspring. So we need to write a crossover function, and we also need a way to mutate an organism. So let's start with that crossover function. Okay, so let's think about how it might work, right? We have 2 genotypes. We have 2 organisms. Each of them has a genotype. So we have 2 genotypes, and we want to somehow mix the 2 together to make 1 genotype. Now, there's a lot of different ways to do that, and when it's really fun to just go through and try out all the types of different ways and see how it affects your algorithm. But we're going to do a simple one where like 50% of the elements in our new organism are from the old genotype and 50% of them are from the new, or from parent. Like if you have parent A and parent B, 50% of the new organism's genes will be from parent A and 50% of them will be from parent B. And we'll just do it in a way where all the genes will just kind of create a divider right down the middle, and all the genes from this side of the divider will go, like all the genes on this side of the divider on the new organism will come from parent A, and all of these genes will come from parent B. So, yeah. Let's go ahead and add this crossover function to the organism class. So if you go back into your organism class and just kind of paste this function in. Oh. Yeah, I think that indentation might have been a little messed up on the notes, but so you might have to fix that a little bit. Yeah, I realized what I just said earlier. I kind of butchered that saying that, but maybe this will help make it a little more clear. So we're going to create a new child genome. So okay, here we have our current organism, which is self, and then partner is another organism that's being passed in. Our child genome is just going to be a new list, and we're just going to cycle through like the length of how long the genotype should be, and for half of that, we're going to put in the genotype from our current self, and then for the other half of that, we'll put in the genes from our partner, and then those will be in our new child genome, and then we'll create an organism, and then give that organism the genotype of this child genome that we just created, and then return that child. So I know that it can be a little confusing, so are there any questions about that? Anything? Yeah.
So that's not a random half. That's like first half is one, second half is another.
Exactly.
Would there be any difference to doing random half from one and random half from the other?
I mean, I don't think it would make too much of a difference, and that's something that I had. Like, this is just a really simple way of doing it, but you can definitely try that on your own. It'd probably be really fun to do, and you could see how it affects the performance, or if it does at all. But yeah, you could definitely do that. So, any other questions? Okay, yeah, so what we just did was create a way for, basically we created a way for two organisms to create a new organism. Yeah, so now we need to figure out a way to mutate an organism, right? So, back to biology 101 in high school, mutation, all a mutation is like you have your DNA, and when your DNA is transferring over, sometimes those individual genes will, like there's error in transferring it over. So, like, an A might turn into a G, and then you have like two heads or something. But that's all a mutation is. But mutation is actually good because it is what kind of drives natural selection. So this is our mutation method, and so we're just going to add that in there. But so the point is, all mutation does is just randomly change a gene to something random, right? So we're going to add this mutate method to our organism class, and again, sorry for the indentation errors. Cool. So all this is doing is, so here's where the mutation rate comes in. So the mutation rate is generally going to be a number between 0 and 1. And then what we're going to do is, okay, so then what we're going to do is go through every gene in our current genotype. And then for every gene in there, we're going to generate a random number between 0 and 1. That's what this random.random does. It just generates a random number between 0 and 1. And then we see if that's less than or equal to mutation rate. So you can think about this. If mutation rate was like 0.1, then random.random would generate a number that's less than 0.1 approximately 10% of the time, right? So if you want approximately 10% of your genes to change, then you set a mutation rate to 0.1. And then, so if it is less than that mutation rate, then our this current gene at I just gets replaced by a new, completely random gene from the from the nucleotides. So, does that mutation kind of make sense? Any questions about it, or? Right. Okay, so now let's talk about that idea of like the mating pool that we kind of brought up earlier. So what exactly is a mating pool? What kind of function does it serve? Well, the basic idea of natural selection is that organisms who are more fit are more likely to reproduce, and therefore pass their genes on to the next generation. So to formalize that a bit more, I have this paragraph here. When reproduction happens, 2 organisms in the population are selected to reproduce, and their child is added to the new population. And this is repeated until the new population is big enough to replace the old population. And the selection of the 2 organisms is done in a manner so that organisms with higher fitnesses are more likely to be selected. So this last sentence is what's really important. So you can imagine kind of a roulette wheel where, like, if you can imagine a wheel that you're spinning, like on a Wheel of Fortune or something, and the organisms, it's still completely random where it's going to land, but the organisms that will have a higher fitness will cover up more of that wheel, and the organisms with lower fitness will cover up less of the wheel. That way, you're more likely to select the organisms with higher fitness, right? And so one naive way of doing that is to actually create a list called mating pool, and the number of times an organism is present in that list is like proportional to their fitness. That would definitely work. It's really memory intensive though, because you may have like 1,000 copies of this organism, and you can figure out maybe more efficient ways of doing that. But there's a better method, and it comes from math. So warning, I'm sorry, but you don't. It's okay if some of this notation doesn't make sense, but we say that the probability that a organism should be selected is basically its fitness divided by the sum of all the fitnesses of all the members of the population, right? Because that would make a kind of proportional probability. Now, again, it's okay if that doesn't make a lot of sense right now, but let's actually implement this, though. So there's probably different ways to do this, but the one that I chose used a library called NumPy. So if you have your terminal open,
You're in desktop.
Oh, well,
I
mean, I'm just okay. Well, I don't know how to work Windows. Sorry. Oh, you're already there. Okay,
yeah.
Gotcha. Cool. So you're gonna want to use pip, which is the Python package manager, to install this library called NumPy. So you can just do pip install NumPy, and I think, Ben, you already have it installed?
I don't know if I have NumPy. I might.
I mean, you ran this before, so... but yeah, you should run pip install NumPy. I think you already do. So yeah, it says, in this case, it says requirement already satisfied because we already have it installed, but when you guys run it, it should actually install NumPy.
Yes, question?
Oh.
Mine says pip isn't recognized, but I have
Try pip 3.
Yeah,
Like
if
pip
we
no
install
section.
pip 3, it's going to be pip 3. Or if we install Python 3.
Alright. Cool.
Yeah, pip 3, no spaces in between. Pip 3 install NumPy.
pip 3 is not recognized.
Yeah, it's probably... Are you on Windows?
Yeah.
Okay, it's probably some kind of like environment variable stuff. Yeah.
Woo!
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay, cool. Anybody else having trouble with anything? Cool.
I think if you go through the installation process again for Python 3, it'll give you the option to like make sure to like select add environment variable to path or something like that.
Yeah, you're gonna want to do like a custom settings, and then you can click add to environment variables, and it does it for you.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, if there's any questions afterwards and you're trying to get this to work on your own machine and you can't get it to work right now, feel free to come up afterwards. I can help you with it. Ben or Ethan or Hannah can help you with it. So, yeah. And then, so I'm gonna go ahead and move on just because we kind of got started a little late. But now that you have NumPy installed, we want to use it in the program, right? In order to do that, just like if you're going to use a scanner or something in Java, you have to import it. So let's go to the top here, and we're just going to put in import NumPy. And Python allows you to just kind of like rename things that you import, and calling it NP is something that people commonly do. So I stuck with that convention. And then what we're going to do is create this select two organisms function. So remember, we're trying to select two organisms where it's biased towards selecting ones with higher fitness. So yeah, so we're going to add that to our population class. So you can just add it anywhere. I added it after Calc Fitness. And okay, this is like the most, I guess, Python-y function here. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about exactly what's going on. If you have questions about this type of syntax and stuff, feel free to come up afterwards, and I'd be happy to answer those questions. But basically, all it's doing is it's getting an array of all the fitnesses of all the organisms. It's going to get the sum of all those, because if you remember, our formula involves the sum. So we need to get the sum of all the fitnesses. And then we're going to create this list called P, and, you know, I'm sure that this whole big mess here is a big mess with syntax, but, you know, it just, all it's doing is for every element in the population, we're going to take its that fitness and divide it by the fit sum, and we're going to apply that to everything that's in the fitnesses, right? So then our P will be the probability for each organism that it should be selected. And then the reason we use NumPy is because it has this really convenient method called np.random.choice, where you can put in an array and then tell it how many members you want out of it, and you can give it that probability rate that you created that will, you know, cause it to have the bias towards the ones that should have higher probability of being selected. So that'll give you two kind of mates, two organisms, and you'll just return both of those. So I know this isn't something you're used to in Java, but Python allows you to kind of return two things in a tuple, which is really convenient. So and yeah, again, I know that syntax can be kind of confusing, so if you have questions, feel free to ask me afterwards. But cool. So now let's talk about the whole reason we did all this stuff, right, is the natural selection function. So recall, here's, you know, we already kind of said this. This is the natural selection algorithm we talked about earlier. And we have everything we need to actually implement this now, because we have a way of, you know, selecting two organisms, which is what the function of the purpose of the mating pool was. We have a crossover function, and we have a mutation function. So we're now able we have functions for all that now, so we're able to actually perform natural selection. So let's write that function. And go ahead and put this in your population class. And I again apologize about the indentation. I think somehow I must have switched from like using an editor that used tabs by default to one that used spaces or something. So how was that? Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Okay. So what is this natural selection doing? Right. It's going to be doing what we've kind of been describing all along, where it's going to have a new population list, and then it's going to go through our current population, and that select two organisms method that we wrote earlier, we're going to get two organisms using that method, and we're going to create a new organism by basically mating these two organisms. So yeah, so A.crossover B, that's going to say, okay, A and B need to cross over their genes and create a new organism that we're calling new organism. And then we want to mutate that new organism a little bit with our mutation rate that was passed in. And then we're going to just add that new organism to our new population. And then at the very end, we want to just replace our current population with a new population, and then we also want to call Calc Fitness again, so everything will have a fitness associated with it, so that we can run this multiple times. So, any questions about that, the natural selection process? So, cool.
I promise we're almost there.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, and then now I realized it was kind of hard to like test this along the way, so I realized I could get kind of boring, but now we can actually see it working once we write this main class, right? So yeah, believe it or not, we've implemented everything we need for a genetic algorithm. So the whole genetic algorithm has been implemented at this point, but now we need to actually be able to run it. So we can define a few auxiliary functions that are going to be helpful for displaying the algorithm running. So first of all, we're going to use this. We're going to write this function called getBest. So like we have this population of organisms.
Where'd you put the marker? Thank you.
We have this population of organisms, and we want to be able to get the best one of those to be able to display it. So we're going to write this function, and just go ahead and put it in your population class, just anywhere in there. And
Okay, Windows, if you're having weirdness with Windows, type the command pi space -m space pip space install space numpy. I guess that works for some reason, because I'm able to do pip, but I guess that's if you have a wonky installation, maybe haven't set the environment variables, that's your Windows solution.
cool. Yeah. So this getBest function, it's just going to basically look through the entire population and basically just select the one with the best fitness and then return it. So, right. So now let's talk about the kind of main loop here. So we talked about earlier how you're going to perform natural selection multiple times until you get a good answer, right? So what we need to do, here's what we need to do. We need to define the hyperparameters. So the hyperparameters are like your population size and your mutation rate and stuff like that. Well, that's actually the only two. And I suppose the target word is kind of a hyperparameter as well. And then you need to initialize the population, and then you need to run natural selection until the best organism in the population has optimal fitness. Now, this is an important note, right? Because in our case, there is such a thing as an optimal fitness. It's 1. It's whenever all the characters match up. In some cases, you may not have an optimal fitness, right? Like if you're trying to fit a model to a bunch of data or something, you might not be able to fit everything exactly. You might not be able to fit everything perfectly. In our case, we have a way of doing that, but in some cases, you may just want to keep going for a specified number of generations until you have something that's good enough. So yeah, let's go ahead and create a new file in the same directory. Make sure you're in the same directory as genetic.py, and I just called it main.py. You can call it whatever you want, but cool. And then in here, just go ahead and copy and paste all this code, and we're basically just doing everything that I just described. So in Java, if you have a class in the same directory, you don't have to like import it or anything. Like it just is already kind of there. But here we have to import the population class from genetic, and then now we're going to do that thing we talked about. We're define the hyperparameters. So I'm going to set population size to 100 and mutation rate to 0.01. And again, we'll play around with these values later. Then actually a really cool tool to allow us to do that. So that's going to be really fun. And then the target word. So Stephen Hawking recently died, so I in honor, I put a quote of his as the target word. And then we're going to initialize the population, and then run through that loop and call natural selection as many times as it takes until the fitness value is equal to 1. And then just print out the best member of the population every time. So now, finally, after all this work, you get to actually see it working. So, well, hopefully. So let's run Python main.py. And
Where did you?
oh, this is OneDrive. Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, OneDrive's been messing with everything lately.
Okay.
It's great. It's beautiful.
Well, let me.
Get out here.
Yeah. I don't use Windows. Just want to make sure everyone knows that.
That we're up.
Your algorithm doesn't natively support apostrophe as lambda support.
Oh yeah, it doesn't, does it? Well, you can add it.
This one here.
Not for sure, but I think you can also type like CMD in the bar at the top, and it will open up a terminal.
Well,
There. Oh, wait.
I'm just trying to remember from last summer, so that could be a blind wrong guess. But
Wait, no. CD, but you shouldn't have these issues most likely, so you should just be able to run python main.py cd. You're in the OneDrive desktop? Is that where you're at?
Yes.
Okay.
Will it still work?
cd. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
No Python. I'm gonna steal your thunder.
Let's hope it works. Yep, cool. I don't know how well you can see this, but it's like just a random text, it looks like, right? But you can see it starting to like separate into words, and then eventually, you know, it'll converge to the actual answer.
So what is it showing the best one of each?
It's showing the best one of each.
Okay.
Yeah, and now it's just looking for that one letter. Oh no, it's looking for another one too. And you can play around with these hyperparameters to get it. Maybe it will. At this point, it just has to find one character randomly. There it goes.
Yeah.
Depends on the random.
All right. So
I'm gonna help you get to the.
Cool. Yeah. So that's really fun and all, and that's what you should have. But you have to go in and change the hyperparameters. So the other day we were talking, and Ben was like, "Oh, it'd be cool to have a visualization for this and a way to."
It's coming. There it is. Okay. This is available in the repository with the notes. I think it's in the visualizer folder, and I do think I included notes on how to install the dependencies and stuff you need.
But yeah, at this point you can just watch, and then this is a tool to allow you to play around with the mutation rate and stuff. So let's enter a target string like hello ACM, and we can play around with it. So I don't know. Let me ask you a question. What do you think? Well, maybe we'll just see it work first, right? Like let's split this mutation rate down to like 0.1 and start it. And you can see it's doing the kind of the same thing we were talking about earlier. And there's probably a more optimal way of doing this. Cool. But, okay, let me ask you a question. What will happen if we set the mutation rate to 1? Any ideas?
Will it ever converge?
That will be proper monkeys with typewriters.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah, so eventually it might
Photo
converge.
short solution.
But, yeah, it's going to be completely random because it's going to mutate every member of every gene.
It's spelled hello backwards.
That would have been really cool. Like, I don't know. If you wanted to wait until it converged, then maybe you could go buy a lottery ticket or something. But I don't want to sit here and wait for it to converge because it probably, will take longer than the age of the universe to converge. But
Might help if you put on the dark theme.
yeah, okay. We have dark theme.
Yeah. Does that help?
No,
More visible? Cool.
I'm still disappointed.
What if we do 20%?
Okay.
You can type it in the.
Oh yeah.
Well, whatever. Close enough.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, with a population size of 100, let's see. With this small of a phrase, it should still kind of work, but it would be helpful if we made the population size bigger. That way, it has more of a chance of randomly generating the thing. So that took 59 generations, and if we make the population size maybe 300. Of course, the processing time would take longer, but maybe. Okay, that only took 25 generations. Okay, so
That's actually more process.
yeah,
Yeah, because you're holding 300 strings at any given time.
Right.
That's, yeah.
so the better solution is to just keep it like at 100, kind of how we had, and put the mutation rate down, so it's kind of more, it's more confident about its choices, right? So if we brought that down to maybe 0.05 or something. I don't know, it still took like 34 generations, but cool. So yeah, this kind of introduces something. So I guess genetic algorithms can kind of be classified. I guess maybe it's up for debate of like whether or not you would classify it as like a machine learning type algorithm. But in machine learning, there's this thing called the Bias-Variance Tradeoff, where the bias is like, okay, it's basically asking how susceptible your model is to change. So, you know, if it's extremely biased, it'll get new information but not change its mind about something, right? But if it has a high variance, then it'll just change its mind randomly, or not necessarily randomly, but it'll be more likely to change its mind with new information. And you can kind of see that with the mutation rate, and it's really fun to just play around with because, you know, when we had the mutation rate at 1, it had an extremely high variance. It was like somebody that told you, oh, I think Nutter Butters are the best, and then they came up to you and said, no, fudge rounds are the best, and you're like, okay, fudge rounds are the best. And every time you get new information, you just completely change your mind. And obviously that doesn't help it converge at all. But also, if we have a mutation rate of 0, which means we're completely biased, any guesses on what's going to happen? Yeah, so it'll get to, yeah, it's there. It'll get to what's called a local optimum. Yeah, it'll never be able, it's never going to randomly generate any more characters, and this will actually never converge, right? Because it's not able to generate anything more random. Cool. Anything else you guys want to try on this visualization? Yes.
The entire text of All-Star and Smash Mouth.
Have fun with that one. Stream it and send us the link.
I'm just going to do this. The entire text of All-Star Smash Mouth.
I don't even think it accepts the entire text, to be completely honest.
You could run it in the command line program, probably. I don't know how this would handle it, but should probably make a mutation rate of not 0. In fact, with this large of something, we should probably make it still kind of small, though. And, okay, we'll try a population size of 100. See how it starts to look.
Can you just, like, perfectly fit that? That's awesome.
Well, I mean, it's generating 100 at once, so it's going to calculate the fitness. And
no, sorry, I meant the string.
Oh. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You can, I don't know, you can kind of see it start to converge, like the entire.
The capital X is staying the while even though it's wrong.
Yeah.
There you go.
Slash mouth. It generates some really cool things.
Slash
Okay, needs to change that comma. Come on. Maybe if we start clapping for it or rooting for it.
And keep in mind, it's only showing the best one, right? So really what's doing is every generation it's generating 100 strings that are more wrong than this. Or up to 100 strings that are more wrong than this.
The problem is it has to randomly choose the tickets space in that spot.
The column 2,
Right.
he had 2 commas in the dictionary, so more likely to have commas than anything else.
Oh, there was 2 commas in the.
I believe so.
Oh.
I think there were 2.
Oh, well, my bad. But okay.
Wow, Andrew, that would explain why this has like 50 commas.
What?
The lyrics of Smash Mouth into it. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, you could. I highly recommend just playing around with these hyperparameters and playing around with putting random text in here. I don't know. I was thinking about making a game where like it generates one text at a time, and then everyone has to try to guess what it's trying to say. I don't know. That could be fun. If somebody wanted to implement that, that would be really cool, and I would really like it if you showed me. But let's see. Is there anything else in the notes?
So this visualization program, it is using the same Python script as y'all just wrote in this program. The one modification I made is that like I fixed some of the timing so everything displays properly. But it is using that same exact script. So even if you can't get the visualizer working, right, you're going to get the same effects if you just kind of go in your Python script and just kind of change the strings and the other parameters there.
Yeah, so in terms of where to go from here, I guess I just kind of threw the idea out there about the game. That would be really cool. I really hope someone does that. But yeah, play around with the mutation rate and population size parameters, and see what happens when we kind of saw the 2 extremes and see what happens in between there. And try to use genetic algorithms in another domain. So that's what makes genetic algorithms cool, is that you can apply it to so many different things. So for example, maybe you're really good with making video games. So maybe you can use a genetic algorithm to generate a character that has never been in existence before, but your genetic algorithm just kind of created this character that is a really cool character. Or maybe it generates a course using a genetic algorithm. Yeah, so there's really cool things to do with genetic algorithms. If you need help coming up with ideas, feel free to talk with others, and you can use the ACM off-topic chat for that, or just talk to other people. But yeah, I also have some credits here. There's some thanks to these people for using. I used some information from these two sources to write this. So, any questions?
For another visualization, you could do like the genetic cars syndrome.
Yeah, sure. That's actually really cool. What is it? Boxcar or something?
Evolutionary car game.
Yeah, probably.
There's also like the I think Google made like
Boxcar
the walking creatures.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
What?
I made walking creatures.
Yeah, Jacob made
watching
one.
Mario.
It's the
Oh,
Class is trash.
it's the very top on the list.
it is? Oh, okay.
This is weak.
Oh yeah, it's HTML5, so.
It's bright.
Holy crap, that's a lot of cars. Yeah, so this is, oh yeah, these are really cool. So, wow, that generated one that was good. Okay right away. So, you saw it generated a bunch of cars, that was the population, and the genotype here is like, I don't know exactly how they have the genotype defined, but you can see the phenotype here, and it's basically trying to get to one that can, its fitness is, I think, the distance that it gets. So this one is getting kind of far, but it'll probably work soon, like right now. Yeah. And now it's going to use that fitness and use that organism which had the highest fitness to generate a whole new population, just like what we were doing. And this is a lot cooler than what we were doing, but yeah. So I could watch this all day.
This is kind of interesting too, because like whereas in our case like our strings converge to a very specific value, here your fitness is just how far you go, so it's never going to converge. You can always go further.
Yeah, although eventually it kind of levels out, like a kind of logarithmic curve generally.
Oh shit. Alright, I do think we need to go. It is 6:36. Yeah. Just a reminder, next week, 5:30 to 8:30, we're having our programming competition here on the second floor. It's going to be great. We will have prizes, more information to come about that.
And sign up on HackerRank if you haven't yet.
Yeah.
The information for that is on the GroupMe. If you're not part of that and want to be, come to any of the officers after.
You can also go to cs.okstate.edu/ACM/competition to go to. It'll redirect you to the sign up. It's going to be a lot of fun. If you've never participated in our programming competitions, we give you like 10 different problems that can be solved. You like writing code. You write code, you submit it, and whoever solves the most problems will. They'll win, right? It's a race to solve. Yeah, it depends on the point system, but yeah, we're really excited about that, and also we'll presumably we'll have like food and stuff too. That looked like it hurt. So if you want to do genetic algorithms, you can do stuff like this instead of playing with strings.
Yeah.
That looks rad.
Just in case anybody was wondering, the reason we didn't do something like this is because it also involves like programming other things,
like gravity,
like physics and gravity and stuff. And that's honestly like the part we did is when you're writing genetic algorithm stuff, and you can ask Jacob all about this because he wrote something kind of cool.
The physics is the worst part.
Right, the physics is the worst part, and
yeah,
right.
No, I think the physics is the best part.
It's the most amount of work. The genetic algorithm part is the easy part, but so. I guess.
So I was using Unreal. What? I was using Unreal.
Wow.
Oh. That's Unreal.
Cool. Yeah.
Or, sorry.
Okay. Wow. And also, if you're here for CS1 or C and C++, we have a sign-in sheet for you to get extra credit. So please make sure you sign this before you leave. Thank you for showing up. Yes.
What's extra credit? Extra credit.
No.
Okay, well, I put my name on there anyways.
Okay, good. But you can get
Okay,
credit,
I'm
extra
gonna-
credit for the programming company.
Oh, awesome.